and they heap abuse on you, but they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead.
Thank you, Reuben. Reuben has just read to us from the letter of Peter, and I think it's fair to say that Peter had gained a profound and very real personal experience of what it meant to be a disciple. He knew that there would be a cost, and yet he also knew the glory of following the Lord Jesus Christ. We want to turn today to Luke chapter 9. We've been following through and preaching through this Gospel of Luke. We want to turn to chapter 9, and the passage that we will read today follows that point in time where Peter, when asked who he thought Jesus was, said, "You are the Christ of God." So this is a pivotal moment in the work of Jesus with the disciples, that they had come to this conviction that he wasn't just a good man or a good teacher or maybe one of the prophets of old. This was actually the fulfillment of the promise God had made clear back in the beginning of humanity's troubles, that he would send someone to heal and resolve and bring an end to all of the troubles of the human family. And so Peter had gained this conviction: you are the Christ of God. You are that one who has been sent. And then we want to pick up from there and read the passage from verses 21 down to 26. But he warned them and instructed them not to tell this to anyone, this fact that he was the Messiah, saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised up on the third day." And he was saying to them all, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. For what is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels." There's far too much in these verses that we have just read to treat in one sermon. If I tried to, you'd be overwhelmed with information and not much of it would connect with you. So we're going to spend at least one more Sabbath sermon on this passage, and maybe even two. I'll see how it goes as I develop that material. But there's too much to treat this in just one go. So today we're just going to I'm going to give you a brief overview of the passage, and then we're going to look down at just one element in this passage. But to start with, I want to simplify the passage. I want to share with you an imaginary dialogue. It's a very simple dialogue, but a dialogue between Jesus and the disciples that really captures what is going on in these words that Jesus has just spoken to them. So here it is, the simplified dialogue. Jesus says to them, "Go this way," or we could say that way. And the disciples respond to him, and they say, "But Lord, no one else is going that way." And then Jesus responds back to their statement and says, "I am going that way. And if you want to follow me, you will go that way as well." So there's the simplified dialogue, and immediately that we read this, it alerts us to a basic fact that it's really important for us to take a hold of and to understand and to bring into our lives, to incorporate into our lives. And that basic fact is this, that if we are going to follow Jesus, we will be countercultural. You say, countercultural, Pastor? What are you asking us to all become leftist and Marxist and revolutionaries? No, not in that way. But if we're going to follow Jesus, we will find that our lives take a completely different trajectory than the lives of those around us who are not following Jesus. Oh, there's similarities, just like when I was showing the kids the different sports balls. The balls are all round, except for the football. The balls are round. The different sports have similarities. You run in them, you throw things in them, there's different similarities, but there's a difference. And the life of the follower of Jesus, we just kind of a heads up, we should expect that our lives become different in significant ways than the lives of those who aren't following Jesus. Remember the simplified dialogue. Jesus said, "Go that way." We are going that way. "Oh, but Lord, no one else is going that way." Well, yes, Jesus says, "I'm going that way. And if you want to follow me, you will go that way as well." So we're alerted to this basic fact, but then we want to ask the question. The question immediately comes up for us. Well, if we're going to be countercultural, if we're going to be different, just what is that difference made up of? How is Jesus different? How are we to be different from those who aren't following Jesus? So we want to take up that basic question. I see in this passage, it's going to break the whole passage down into kind of bite-sized mental chunks so we can kind of be aware of what's going on here. I see in this passage two ways that Jesus is different. And then following his statement of that difference, he spells out the consequences of following him in his difference or not following him. And having spelled out the consequences, he then gives a warning as to what happens if you don't follow. Jesus is being quite serious with us here. He's saying, look, here's the situation in our lives, in the world. Here's the situation. I want to put it straight to you, he's saying. And he's making essential things clear. So as we work through this passage, we really want to follow him in that. Okay, so we'll look at the consequence of following or not following in another sermon, and the warning that he gives at the tail end of this statement he makes to the disciples. But today we want to look at those two ways that Jesus is different. So 2 ways. Can't remember if I put this on a slide or not. Let's see. I did. That's what we find in the passage. 2 ways we will be different. The consequences of being different or not being different, and the warning. Okay, so then we come to these 2 ways. How was Jesus different? The first way, Jesus lived for others instead of for himself. He lived for others instead of for himself. But then there's another element. That element by itself is not enough. It will leave important aspects out of the picture. There's this other element that Jesus lived for others under the direction of his heavenly Father. In other words, Jesus lived for others in obedience to God. We'll be unpacking those, some today and some in the weeks ahead. But those, I think, really capture, these are the 2 ways that Jesus is different. Let's look more closely at both of these. The passage we read begins with Jesus telling the disciples certain things that they had never heard him say before. Let me read again verse 22. The Son of Man, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and the scribes and be killed and be raised up on the 3rd day. I think those first 3 things were so shocking to the disciples that they didn't even hear the bit about Jesus being raised up on the 3rd day. This pronouncement that the Son of Man, that the one that they had just said, you are God's promised one, you are the Messiah, the one they expected to take the earthly throne, to elevate Israel to the height of worldly greatness, to give them all posts in his kingdom government, and bring everything that they'd always longed for on an earthly temporal level. The one that they expected to do all of that, he had just told them, I'm going to suffer many things. I'm going to be rejected by the whole religious establishment. Do you realize the church threw Jesus out? The church threw him out. I'm going to be rejected, he said, and then not just, if that's not enough, I'm going to be killed. And they heard those things, and again, I don't think they even heard the bit about being raised up. They were so shocked by what he had said to them. So Jesus speaks about suffering many things and being rejected and being killed. But then the question immediately comes to us, why is Jesus going to suffer? Why is he going to be rejected? Why is he going to be killed? Is he doing this for himself? Did he just wake up one morning and think, I think it would be really cool to suffer and be rejected and be killed. I think I'll try that out. Was Jesus doing this for himself? Well, the answer is really obvious to us, that he wasn't doing this for himself at all. He's doing this for others. Jesus is doing this for others. We don't have time in this sermon today to go into all the reasons as to why it was necessary for Jesus to go to the cross and what was being accomplished there, and we're going to leave that to the side for today. It's very important stuff, but it's not what we're focused on. What we want to see here is that Jesus goes to the cross because of necessities that concern us. We could put it this way: if Jesus was to truly care for us, then he must go to the cross. You see that? You making that connection? He goes to the cross because he lives his life for others. And he has seen in the life of the others, he has seen problems and challenges and difficulties which he knows only he can solve, that only he can resolve. And he's deeply committed to serving the other, living for them, lifting them, helping them. And so he goes to the cross. All of these things happen to him because his life is on that trajectory of, I am here to live for others and not for myself. I just want to interject a brief example here that can connect this in to maybe experiences that we have had. Maybe not all of us, but I think you'll be able to relate to this. Imagine that you have cared for someone who is in old age, and their body has become weak and they have significant health problems. Maybe someone with dementia. And when we look at that kind of case, or if we've actually lived that and experienced that, we understand right away that to care for that other person, there is suffering and sacrifice involved, isn't there? To care for another, often there is suffering and sacrifice involved. It's just part of the caring. And if the caring is to be done, the suffering and sacrifice has to be accepted. So I've used an example here that has to do with physical health. But we could also think of the necessity of forgiveness in someone's life. If someone has sinned against me, there's a certain kind of suffering in extending forgiveness, isn't there? I'll leave aside my right for revenge or my desire to get even, and there often can be a kind of suffering. And even in an act of forgiveness, extending forgiveness to another. You see what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to illustrate that to care for others, the necessities involved in caring for others often involve, for us, often involve suffering and sacrifice. We certainly see that with Jesus, don't we? And so Jesus lives for others by going to the cross. He lives for others by going to the cross. And in this, he is profoundly different. We really want to get a hold of that. We don't want to just notice it for a moment. We want to dwell on this. We want to see how different Jesus is from what we're typically used to. I want to give a couple examples of how we typically are as humans. I was 21 years old, I think, and I spent a school year on the campus of Stanford University. And I was not a student there. I was there on the Stanford campus to give witness to Christ, to share Christ with students. And I found it quite difficult. Wasn't sure quite how to go about it initially. I tried some things that didn't really work, and so I was a bit baffled. But partway through the year, someone told me, hey, there's some guys down in Southern California who are doing campus ministry on the Long Beach campus and some other campuses in Southern California. Why don't you go down and see what they're doing? So drove down to Southern Cal and met with these two guys, and they gave me this survey form that had about 15 questions on it. It was a philosophical religious survey. I thought, oh great, I'll see what I can do with this. So I'd go to the quad area there at Stanford between the bookstore, and they had a restaurant area, cafeteria for students, and it was known as the quad. And I'd go to the quad, and I'd kind of wait and prayerfully ask, Lord, who should I go talk to? And I'd see someone sitting who was obviously not hurrying off to a class. They were just relaxing a bit. And so I'd go up to them and say, would you mind taking part in a philosophical religious survey? A little bit of skepticism usually. And I'd say, well, actually, I've discovered that people really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these questions I'm going to ask. And so people say, okay. And I had a wonderful time. Almost every person I approached, we had a conversation that lasted nearly an hour. Because God just really seemed to do things with this survey and this engagement and the kind of things we talked about. So they'd say, okay, and I'd say, okay, so what's your first question? I'd say, okay, well, the first question is, what is your criteria for a meaningful and fulfilling life? Okay, can you give me 3 things? Well, almost every single person with that first question would think a bit, and then they'd look at me and they'd say, you don't ask easy questions. And I'd say, well, yeah, I know it's not an easy question, but do your best. And they would give me their answer. But then I'd ask them the second question. And this is the one I want to bring out for you. The second question was, what do you think is mankind's basic problem? And I was astounded. I'd be quite curious to go on a campus today and see if they answered the same way that they did back in the early 80s. But at least at that time on the Stanford campus, almost every single person that I asked that question to, what do you think is man's basic problem, gave me some variation on the theme of selfishness. People are selfish. We only think of ourselves. We're preoccupied with ourselves. Those were the kinds of answers that they gave me. Taking care of myself before I take care of you, protecting myself before I protect you, that was the general sentiment. That, they said, is mankind's basic problem. Or I think of the Albanians. Many of you know we spent 10 years in the country of Albania, and you've probably heard me say this before. I'll probably say it again at some point, but the Albanians had this saying that translates like this, and they said it often: nothing is done without self-interest. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And they would affirm that over and over again, and very strongly: nothing is done without self-interest. Which incidentally made them constantly try to guess why we were in Albania. Why would an American leave America and come to Albania? They couldn't figure it out. So unfortunately, they decided that we were CIA and that we were making a lot more money being there than we could if we were in the United States. So again, nothing is done without self-interest. That was their conviction. Well, we might protest and claim that we do think of others. Even people who don't follow Jesus at all, they think of others also. And yes, we may well at times, often in times of crisis or emergency, most people are ready to spring in and help. So it's true, we do think of others, but often that thinking of others is mingled, like the Albanian said, with self-interest. And sometimes, even in our service of others, the primary motive is something that we feel we will gain for ourselves. We hardly admit it to ourselves, but sometimes that's the case. Sometimes even a lot of the things that Christians do are not so much really for the people they're doing them for. It's because, well, this is what I have to do to be a good Christian so I can go to heaven. Sometimes we're actually operating on that level. But Jesus is different. He always thinks of the other. Always. In him is operating the motive of the very purest love imaginable. So let's do a little thought experiment. Think of your most selfless and altruistic moment. Think of the moment in time where you said, okay, if I was to put something up there that showed that I had actually been selfless and really thought of another, think of your most selfless moment. And then add to it 100 times over. And then purify it another 100 times. And you might just be approaching the Spirit of Jesus. In Jesus, in him, there is a passion for the well-being of others that consumed his whole life. And he pours himself out for others, even in cases where he knows there will be no reward. We want to really get an eyeful of that. You want to dwell on that. You want to spend time thinking, Lord, what was your love actually like? We feel good if in one little moment of our day we thought of someone else or went out of our way to care for someone else. For Jesus, every single moment of his day was preoccupied with the question, how can I bless those around me? How can I encourage them? How can I serve them? How can I help them? So that's our first point. That's the first way that Jesus was different. But then there's this second crucial point, that the second way that he is different, it's not directly spoken about in this particular passage, but it's mentioned many times in the Gospels, and it especially comes crystal clear in the Gospel of John. And that second way that Jesus is different is that Jesus lives for others under the direction, under the guidance of his Father. In other words, Jesus' living for others is characterized by obedience to his Father. As a man, his is a God-directed life. Listen to the testimony from the Gospel of John. The first statement here comes from John chapter 12, verse 49. For I did not speak on my own initiative, but the Father himself who sent me has given me commandment what to say and what to speak. Do you see what's being pictured there? Jesus is so in tune with the Father that as he encounters different people and he's in different situations, the Father is telling him, this is what I want you to say. This is the message that needs to be given. Jesus is constantly directed in everything he does by the Heavenly Father. Listen to another statement from John chapter 14. This is verses 30 and 31. I will not speak much more with you, for the ruler of the world, that's Satan, is coming, and he has nothing in me, but that the world may know, that I love the Father, and as the Father gave me commandment, even so I do. Arise and let us go from here. Do you see that? So that the world may know I love the Father, and as the Father gave me commandment, even so I do. Do you see the basic pattern? And then the last statement, John 15, verse 10. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. And so this is how it is with Jesus. He's living for others under the direction of his Father. And this is what sends him to the cross. But then notice that Jesus does not stop by speaking about himself alone. He doesn't stop with just verse 22. I'm going to suffer, be rejected, die, and raised again. He doesn't stop there. He goes on saying, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Do you see what Jesus is doing? We've just seen these two ways that Jesus is different. Now he's saying, I want you to adopt this difference. I want you to follow me in these very ways. I want you to learn to live for others. Not, well, Lord, I'll give an hour a week to others, or Lord, maybe I can give up a Sunday. Lord, I'll serve with this program at church. No. Jesus wants the whole of our life focus, to be that which was his life focus. I am here for the other, not for myself. He wants us to adopt this difference. He wants us to live our lives by the same Spirit that he lived his life. He wants us to be directed by the Father as he was directed by the Father. It's as if Jesus has said to us, the pathway of my life in the world is to live as I'm directed by the Father, to live for others instead of myself. And for me, this means death on a cross. If I'm to serve others, if I'm to live for others, if I'm to listen to the Father, it means for me death on a cross. But then he turns to us and he asks, what will it mean for you? What will it mean for you? It's a crucial question to ask ourselves. We're going to develop these thoughts further, and unfortunately there's a couple-week gap before we can take this up again. but we'll develop these thoughts further in some other sermons. But for right now, I would just like to close my comments with a story about a failure in my own life to live for others. Sometimes the best way to begin to respond to Jesus is to think about how you haven't been what he's calling you to be. And we can start there and confess there, and then he moves us on, and he grows us, and he changes us. So I want to tell the story about the failure of my older brother and I to put our mother before ourselves. I'm ashamed to tell this story, but this is part of my experience, and I'm sure that there's similar kinds of things that you could find in your own life and experience. At the time this happened, I lived in Denver, Colorado. I was trying to remember this morning if Kelly and I were married yet. I couldn't remember. But one of the perks for me in living in Denver was, for most of my life, I was a rock climber. That's what I like doing for recreation, is get out and climb big cliffs. And so Denver is fantastic for that, because you can drive just 20 minutes from my house was Golden, Colorado, and there was a cliff there that you could go climb on, so just a 20-minute drive, and I could go climbing after work and still have time in the summer before the sun set. Or if I had a bit more time, I could drive 45 minutes to Boulder, Colorado, and El Dorado Canyon. El Dorado Canyon is one of the best climbing areas in the world. And so I had this great climbing right there in my backyard, and it was fantastic for when I needed some recreation and just wanted to get out. And well, my brother had come to visit, and he'd come together with my mom. My mom was working on a PhD at the time at University of California, Riverside, but they had some time off, and they came out to Colorado to spend some time with me. And so Carl and I, we'd climbed together since I was 15 and he was 18. And he always said, "Rob, you're my best climbing partner." So we got a chance to be together and to climb in El Dorado Canyon. And I had climbed there quite a bit because I'd been living in Denver, but he had never climbed there. So we were excited, and we spent 2 days climbing in El Dorado. Had a great day the first day, and second day we got out as early as we could. We did this fantastic climb. It's about an 800-foot cliff. Great climb. Some climbs are better than others, just aesthetically and the type of moves you do. And we had a fantastic time. And we got back down from that climb. And my mom had been at kind of a picnic area that was there by the river in El Dorado Canyon. And she said, "You guys go climb, and I'll do some of the reading." She had lots of reading as a PhD student. So she was there reading, and so we get down from this climb, and we went to check on my mom, and in our minds, we were going to go do another climb, because it's only about 3 in the afternoon, and there's still a lot of sunlight, and you got to get in as much climbing as you can when you have the chance. And so we went to check on my mom, and my mom says to us, "I am tired. It's gotten hot out here in the sun. We've got a long ways, Carl and I, to get back home, and there's things I need to deal with back home. We need to leave now." My brother and I didn't sit very well with that. We wanted to climb more. So we started complaining and griping and groaning, and my brother even made some unkind comments to my mom, and finally we gave in. But you see, I share that story just as an example of how easily the selfishness comes up in our lives, how easily we think of ourselves before we think of the other. How hard it often is for us to actually adopt this vital difference of Jesus. I know it's just a couple minutes past noon, but I want to do something that we've done in the past. I want to give you an opportunity to reflect a bit together. Maybe a little harder today, and if you're not comfortable, you can just, doing what I'm going to suggest, you can stay where you're at and just reflect in your own heart and mind. But I'd like you to get with someone else and talk with them a bit, share with each other. What is a time that I can remember where my selfishness won out and I failed to care for another? Confess that failing to someone else. And then pray for each other. Pray for each other that Jesus will be able to lead you in this new way, this way that marked his life, and build these crucial differences in you. So take some time now. We'll take about just maybe 5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes at most. Take some time and just talk with another and share with them, here is a place I have failed. But it's a place I want to grow in, a place I want to be different and learn to really follow Jesus. Go ahead and take that opportunity now.